All right. Hello again, adventurers, and welcome to another exciting episode of D&D Deep Dive, the show where we dive deep into classes, subclasses, and other features of 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons to help you get the most out of your choices. So, today, we are going to be venturing into the realm of the warrior. And actually covering the final tank class from Final Fantasy XIV. Really quick, if you're enjoying this stuff, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell icon to turn notifications on. All three of those things massively help videos like this to get shown to other people. So please, 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 I really appreciate if you did do that. So, the warrior. First things first, kind of a brief history on the warrior. Warrior was one of the 6 original classes you could have in Final Fantasy 1. And it had an upgraded version called the Knight, which a lot of the Knight's abilities eventually became evolved into what is now known as the Paladin. So the warrior has been there since day one. The warrior in Final Fantasy XIV has been there since day one, since pre-A Realm Reborn. It was one of the original classes you could go with. The job that you take before you get warrior is called Marauder. Gladiators are what turn into paladins, and marauders are what turn into warriors. And the big kind of defining feature of the warrior is they have just this massive axe that they use. Now, throughout Final Fantasy, the warrior archetype thing has kind of gone through some changes just in general. Like, eventually, Knight turned into 2 different classes, where you had Knight, which was effectively what the warrior became, and then you had Paladin, which kept like the magic abilities from the Knight and the ability to cast spells and cover allies, and so depending on the version of Final Fantasy you're dealing with, warriors and knights and paladins would kind of trade abilities randomly. Like, in Final Fantasy II, there were no classes, so technically everyone was a warrior. Final Fantasy III, they had I believe it was called the Knight or the Warrior, something similar to that. That worked kind of like that, and then they had an upgraded version that worked kind of like the Knight from Final Fantasy 1, where it got some spellcasting and things like that. Throughout the different iterations of Final Fantasy 3, it's changed quite a bit because they had a lot more than just a single kind of weapon-based class. Whereas in Final Fantasy 1, if you wanted to use all the different swords and things like that, you were a warrior. That's what you had to do, or a fighter, or whatever they called it in whichever version you were into. Then by Final Fantasy IV, you had the Paladin Dark Knight dichotomy, and then you had Kain as a Dragoon. You didn't technically have like a just straight up knight character that was taken up by Cecil, who was a Dark Knight and then a Paladin. And then by Final Fantasy V, you actually had a knight class that never learned any spells, but got the cover of ability. And then later on, you would get the Mystic Knight class, which added spell casting, but it wasn't healing. They didn't have a paladin in that. You actually had what was called Spellblade, where they could actually cast black magic on their swords, and then anytime they attacked, they would effectively do a weapon attack with that black magic spell affecting it as well. And if you gave a Mystic Knight dual wield and Spellblade, you could destroy anything with an elemental weakness, because you would just come in and just go brah brah and just demolish everything over and over and over again. It was just super fun combo. And then Final Fantasy VI had 4 bajillion characters, but Cyan kind of had a warrior style thing, though he was much closer to the samurai, which first showed up in Final Fantasy V. And then as you keep going, the warrior class kind of thing just kind of kept getting relegated to kind of the default. Well, if no one is doing this, then we'll hear. Like in Final Fantasy IX, the sword wielding character that for the life of me I can't remember his name now, because I never got past, I think, halfway through disc 2 in that game. It's a great game, don't get me wrong. It's just I didn't find it until many years after it was past its prime. But he has kind of the cover abilities, and he has spell blades and the things like that. So yeah, the actual class of warrior just keeps changing in its features as you go through Final Fantasy. Never really quite keeping the same thing, beyond the fact that warriors use weapons in general, whether it is the fighter, the warrior, the knights, or whatever they want to call it. They generally tend to use whatever weapons you can give them. More often than not, it's swords and shields. So that does make this one a little bit different. And they tend to have a bit more of a protection focus. Even the original fighter warrior from Final Fantasy 1, which the order your characters are in would affect how often enemies targeted them. So the warrior's job was they would have a really high armor class and really good health, and they would be in the front taking damage. So even from the beginning, there was a kind of protection focus to the warrior that changed and modified as you went along. So getting to the Final Fantasy 14 warrior, this is the one tank class that I personally have not played. However, again, I watched some guides on it. I'm actually remarkably familiar with the warrior. Because due to the fact that I do tanking a lot, that's been the class that I've, or the role that I've played, since, just before getting to, Heaven's Word. I was a Dark Knight, and then I went Gunbreaker. I'm always a tank. And as you get into higher level stuff, you also need to know what the other tanks can do, just like every other role. Understanding the other classes that are in your same role is really useful, because you get paired up with them, you know when to use your cooldowns and the things like that. So I know the warrior relatively well for someone that hasn't personally played it. I will eventually pick up the warrior because I like tanks, and I like leveling multiple classes. I just haven't yet. But the main idea of the warrior in Final Fantasy 14 is Fellcleave. No, it's not it, but it's a big part of it. Fellcleave is an ability that they get that they just spam eventually, and they really love it. But anyway, the big thing for warriors, it's a tank class. This particular tank, compared to the paladin, which is made to be basically impenetrable, they protect their party. Or the Dark Knight is made to kind of drain their enemy and drain their own health to be able to, do damage and to do things like that. The Gunbreaker is built a little bit around mobility and just kind of being cool. Is built around being much more like a DPS than a tank traditionally is. They have DPS combos and the things like that other tanks generally don't get. The warrior originally was kind of built around the idea of the more damage that they do, the better they are at tanking. So they were built around just building ungodly amounts of aggro and just never allowing the enemy to even look at another character. And as they've evolved, and especially when the Gunbreaker came out, where it was a little bit more focused on damage dealing. The warrior has kind of settled into this place of just being remarkably reliant, or not reliant, remarkably good, I guess, at getting critical hits and burst damage and the things like that. Their overall damage, I believe currently, the warrior, DPS wise, I think is 3 of 4. Where you have Gunbreaker's the top DPSer, Paladin is just below, then comes Warrior, and then Dark Knight comes in dead last by a decent amount. Again, DPS is not what these guys are designed to do, but that's people do gauge them on that because it's a video game and that's how they did to do it. So it's not this super powerhouse, but a lot of their abilities are built around getting crits and doing kind of burst damage to keep enemies focused on them. So yeah, as far as how that translates to Final Fantasy or to D&D, well, we're gonna have to look at it. So first things first, we are going to look at the class features, basically hit die and all that stuff. The warrior has a D12 hit dice. That is the largest hit die you can have, and there's only one other class that actually uses a D12. In base D&D, there's only one class that gets a D12 hit die, and that is the Barbarian. Now, the Barbarian in 5th edition is actually built to be effectively a bullet sponge. They are designed to just take copious amounts of damage. Their Berserk is built around the idea that they, anytime somebody hits them, they're going to be taking reduced damage. There are builds you can actually make, depending on your subclass, that will make it even more difficult to take damage. Like, that's what the Barbarian is built around, is taking a lot of damage and then dishing it right back out. Actually very similar to how the warrior played in early Final Fantasy XIV. So seeing that as a D12 hit die, you can kind of assume this is going to be a character that's designed to get hit a lot, which makes sense if they're trying to kind of keep that tank roll going. For proficiencies, you get all armors and shields, which again makes sense. Weapons, you get simple and martial weapons, which means all weapons. Tool proficiencies, none. Your saving throws are strength and constitution, which are both incredibly useful. Well, constitution's useful. Strength, there are quite a few instances where it can be useful. Dex is slightly more useful, but for this character, it makes sense to be strength and Kukulkan. And then skills, you can choose 2 from animal handling, athletics, history, intimidation, insight, and survival. Intimidation is going to be a big one with this class. I'll let you know right now because of some of the features a little later on. So definitely that'll be one of the ones you wanted to take. For starting equipment, you start with a martial weapon, and then a choice between either a short bow and 20 arrows or 2 hand axes. Then another choice between an explorer's pack or a dungeoneer's pack. And then the final thing is you get a set of chainmail and a carved wooden idol related to your heritage. So yeah, for the most part, it's really, really simple. You know, pick a weapon, and they're going to put you in heavy armor right away, which is good. Because you're in heavy armor, you're going to want to be strength-based. As you look at other features that you have in here, strength-based is very good because most of your features circle around either strength or constitution. So those are the 2 things that you want, is strength and constitution, which makes sense. It has a large hit die, so you're going to be taking damage. Constitution also affects how much health you have. So yeah, you're going to want constitution, and you're a strength-based damage dealing kind of class, so strength and con makes sense. Going into the actual different features themselves. At first level, you get a fighting style, which is very similar to the fighter in normal D&D. You only get a choice of 4 different fighting styles compared to the fighter that gets literally every fighting style that exists a fighter can learn. This one you get either defense, dueling, great weapon fighting, or 2 weapon fighting. Defense is simple. You just get a +1 bonus to AC anytime you're wearing armor. Dueling, you get a +2 bonus to damage rolls if you attack an enemy with a one-handed weapon and nothing in your other, or no other weapon in your other hand. So that's kind of useful. Great weapon fighting. You can reroll 1s and 2s on the damage dice when you're using a two-handed weapon. And then two-weapon fighting, you can add your strength modifier to offhand weapon damage. So, again, nothing too fancy. I was a bit surprised by the fact that they didn't have I believe it's called the shielding fighting style. I can actually look it up here real quick. I have the internet in front of me. Let's go fighter, because that's where all the fighting styles are. All right, fighting style. Protection, that's what it's called. It's called protection. Basically, protection allows if somebody hits a creature within 5 feet of you, you can actually use your reaction to impose disadvantage on their on the enemy's attack roll. And it's a kind of standard 5th edition defensive move. Anyone that wants to be kind of that tank style class can benefit from it. And it requires you to wield a shield. So I thought it was a little bit weird that they didn't have that. You'll find out why a little bit later on in the class, but yeah. So that's the only kind of thing I thought about changing, but for the most part, because of how not only the class is built, but the suggestions I'll make for some modifications to make it work a little bit better, I don't really think it needs protection. It has enough kind of stuff in its kit that it doesn't need that. So, the other thing you learn at first level is called Berserk. I'm not going to... hold on. Sorry. Not going to beat around the bush about this. Berserk is a worse version of Rage. That's all it is. It takes most of the text from the Barbarian's Rage ability, but it changes things. Probably the biggest thing it changes is the way that Rage works is a couple different things. First thing is when you're raging, you get a bonus to your damage rolls. It's your rage to damage, and it gets bigger as you level up. That is still here. You get advantage on strength checks and saving throws while you're raging. That is here as well. And then the other part of raging is you get resistance against bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage. So basically, any kind of physical damage you're going to take, you will have resistance to it, meaning you take half damage, which is really, really nice. That is where this one changes things. For Berserk, for the warrior, when you take slashing, piercing, or bludgeoning damage, you reduce the damage by half your Constitution modifier, rounded up. So, 1 or 2. Or technically 3 if you have a 20 modifier. But for the most part, you take 1 or 2 damage off of any slashing, piercing, or bludgeoning damage. Even at first level, that is almost useless. I'm not really sure why. This is something that we've seen a couple different times in the different classes that we've covered here. Is instead of giving resistance to things, they tend to tie it to, well, you'll take this much off of, and it's tied to an ability modifier. And that is always worse than resistance. And with this, specifically because that's the big difference between Berserk and Rage, is Berserk, you take significantly more damage than you would if you were raging. So because of that, it literally is just a worse version. It also mentions you can't cast spells while you're in your Berserk state. It lasts for a minute. It ends early if you're rendered unconscious, or if you haven't attacked a hostile creature or taken damage. You can also end it for a bonus action. And then here's the other thing that kind of really, really hampers this. For Rage, when it ends, it ends. It's not that big a deal. You have a limited number of Rages you can do. You have a limited number of Berserks you can do. You get more as you level up. You start off with 2. Eventually, I think you could do 6 per day. But this one, for a number of rounds equal to 5 minus your Constitution modifier, after your Berserk state ends, you may not use the extra attack ability, and your base movement speed is halved due to fatigue. So not only does Berserk make you take more damage than Rage would, it also, after you're done, you have less attacks you can make. So for whatever reason, like if you get stunned, or if for whatever if you get paralyzed, or just don't take damage and aren't able to make an attack against someone, you get penalized pretty bad for it. So yeah, like it's really not difficult to get someone out of a rage state if you have a smart enemy. Like I said, something as simple as hold person, which is a wisdom saving throw, which barbarians generally don't tend to have high wisdom modifiers. Warriors probably are not going to have high wisdom modifiers either, because they're going to need high constitution and high strength for everything that they do. So wisdom is going to be one of their lower stats. So literally just using a hold person on them and letting it last for a turn means you have just crippled them pretty well. The other thing I'm not particularly fond about this is it adds more complexity for no real reason. For a number of rounds equal to 5 minus your constitution modifier, which means the higher your constitution modifier, the less rounds you have this is happening. But it still means that you're being penalized until you get a 20 constitution modifier, which isn't going to happen. Bare minimum, you are not going to have a 20 constitution modifier until level 8, and that is if you don't take any feats, unless you roll spectacularly well on your first roll. It's not possible to get a 20 modifier until level 8, especially if you're using like point buy or the standard array. It's impossible to get it before level 8. Now, fighters in D&D actually have a benefit because they get additional feats. It's one of the defining features of or not a defining features, but it's one of the special things about fighters is they get additional feats. This warrior doesn't get additional feats, so there's no way that they can get to a point where Berserk isn't a net loss for them until minimum of level 8, and that means they have to sacrifice a lot to get there. So yeah, overall, Berserk is broken. It's just like I said, we've covered this before in the last one. The Dancer was effectively a rogue subclass. Because they took enough abilities from the rogue, including their defining feature, that effectively it was just a rogue subclass with a bunch of other things shoved into it. Because you were playing a rogue with spellcasting, with all these other things in there. And it didn't make sense. This is not quite as bad. But when we get to what you get at level 2, you'll see that this has the majority of barbarian special features. This is kind of a barbarian subclass. But because they don't take all of them and they go on this completely different method, and again, they give you this really broken, diminished version of rage in the form of Berserk, it turns into a really, really underwhelming class. Because if you have both a barbarian and a warrior in the same party, the warrior is always going to feel like they're playing second fiddle to the barbarian, because everything the warrior can do, the barbarian can do better. And their class is built much better around using the abilities that they have, whereas the warrior simply isn't. And Berserk is the first kind of indication that this isn't going to work very well. When I do my final thoughts, I will give my suggestions for changes into things like that. But as far as houses, Berserk, I don't like anything about it. It is just, like I said, it is just a significantly limited version of Rage. And Rage is a barbarian defining feature. Quick refresher on 5th edition class design. Every class is designed to play very differently right from the beginning. The way they do that is they have these things called defining features. Defining features are abilities that are either unique to the class or the class gets... they may not be unique, but the class gets them earlier than other classes, or maybe they can use them differently. And in order for a defining feature to be a defining feature, it has to show up in the first 2 levels. For the Barbarian, their defining features are Rage and Reckless Attack, which we're going to talk about in a second here. Followed very quickly by Unarmored Defense and I can't remember what it's called. They have improved movement. Oh, that actually isn't a defining feature. They don't get that until 5. So yeah, it's Rage and Reckless Attack are the 2 real big defining features of the Barbarian. So yeah, this already has 1, but it's a severely limited version of it. Going to the next level, at 2nd level, you get Reckless Attack. When you make your first attack on your turn, you can decide to attack recklessly. Doing so gives you advantage on all melee weapon attack rolls using strength during that turn, but attack rolls against you are rolled with advantage until the beginning of your next turn. This is very, very similar. I'm actually going to look here. Yeah, I mean, it's not a word-for-word copy of what's in the Barbarian class features, but it should be, to be perfectly honest, because it works identically, and it's called the same thing. It's not even like Berserk where they changed the name to make it fit better with Final Fantasy XIV. No, Reckless Attack is the exact same name. Reckless Attack is a great ability for Barbarians. Barbarians are built around hitting a lot, and specifically they're built around critting a lot. So Reckless Attack is designed to help them to be able to crit. The other thing with Reckless Attack that a lot of people don't realize is, again, the Barbarian is a bullet sponge. They're designed to take damage. Reckless Attack makes them a significantly better looking target because anyone that makes attack rolls against them gets advantage. What are abilities that generally do attack rolls? Well, they're regular attacks that are going to do bludgeoning, piercing, or slashing damage, which they have resistance for. Reckless Attack is designed to make the Barbarian look like a better target so that they are taking more damage to take advantage of the fact that that's what they're built for. Yeah, it also helps them with the critting and everything like that. Barbarians are great for burst damage, but it's both a defensive ability and an offensive ability. And people forget about that aspect of it often. So giving Reckless Attack to the warrior, again, only makes sense due to the fact that in Final Fantasy XIV, warriors do actually have a couple of different abilities that improve their crit chance. So that actually kind of makes sense to give them better crit chance. And in most of D&D, the way you do that is by just giving them advantage. You have effectively twice as many chances to roll a crit with advantage than you do with without of it, because you're rolling 2 dice. Yeah, I mean, it's not a bad ability. It's just, again, by 2nd level, the warrior and the barbarian are going to play identically. The only difference is the warrior is going to take a lot more damage than the barbarian is. But that's not how 5th edition is designed to work. By 2nd level, you should be doing different things from other classes. And this isn't in any way, shape, or form. So, Yeah, not particularly fond of the reckless attack. It's not that it's a bad ability. I don't think this class needs it. The other thing you get at second level is called Beastly Demeanor. You gain a passive intimidation score, which you may use to replace rolls when making intimidation ability checks. This passive intimidation score is equal to 10 plus your strength modifier. So there's a lot to this relatively simple thing. First thing, it says you have a passive intimidation score, which technically every class has a passive intimidation. A passive skill is just 10 plus the skill. And that's what you kind of, that's just your base if you're not trying or anything like that. That's how you normally do. Like your passive perception, which is the most common passive score most people will know. Your passive perception is just how perceptive you are when you're just wandering around. You're not particularly looking for anything. You're just wandering around. What would you normally kind of discover just on your own without looking for anything? Passive investigation is another thing that some DMs keep to track of. But literally any passive ability or any skill has a passive version of it. All passive means in 5th edition, it's 10 plus that, and it's just what would happen if you didn't roll, if you weren't trying, if you were just naturally just walking around doing something. That's what your passive version of a skill is. So that's not doing anything really big. But the you may use to replace rolls when making intimidation ability checks, it effectively means any check that you, intimidation check you meet, will never be lower than your passive score, which means if you're trained at intimidation, that means bare minimum. Let's say you have a 10 charisma. You probably won't, since this class is built to be a little bit intimidating, so you would probably do that maybe as your 3rd highest score. But let's just easy numbers, 10, so you have a +0 to your charisma modifier. If you're trained in it, that means at level 1 and 2, your passive intimidation is a 12. It means no matter what you roll on the die, you can never get lower than a 12 in intimidation. If you do have a higher charisma score for whatever reason, that will get much bigger very quickly. And then as you level up, your proficiency bonus goes up, which will increase that if you're proficient in it. So, yeah, training yourself in intimidation is really useful for the warrior. I have no problems with Beastly Demeanor. Does it have the possibility of being broken? Not really, to be blunt. Intimidation, even if you succeed on an intimidation check, negative results can happen because some people react very poorly to being intimidated, and other people will react poorly to watching you intimidate someone. So intimidation is a very specific skill with a very specific situation where it's going to be very useful for you. You can use it in a much wider amount of situations, but a lot of times it'll do more damage. It'll do more harm than help. Yeah, I think just the fact that intimidation itself has its own checks and balances means this ability isn't going to be too massively broken, especially since this class already requires you to have a good strength score and a good constitution. This would, to really kind of break the class with this ability, you would also have to have a 3rd ability score that was really high. And aside from cheating or really, really lucky rolls, you're generally not going to get that. And even as you level up, you're not going to be able to really invest your ability score improvements in charisma, because you need your constitution so much and you need your strength so much. So yeah, I like it. I think it's cool. I think it's interesting. Another thing you should be aware, that a lot of people don't know, in 5th edition D&D, a nat 1 is only an auto failure on attack rolls. Anything else, and I think saving throws might be the same, though I might be wrong about that. But I know specifically attack rolls, it doesn't matter what your modifier is. If you roll a 1 on an attack roll, you always miss. If you roll a 20 on an attack roll, you always hit. It doesn't matter what their armor class is, what your modifiers are, you will always hit. That's how critical hits and critical misses work. On skill checks, that doesn't happen. You will not always succeed if you roll a nat 20, and you will not always fail if you roll a nat 1. It depends on what the difficulty class of the thing that you're trying to do is and what your modifier is. So because of Beastly Demeanor allowing you to just replace any roll without any limitations, there's nothing in here that says you have to use some sort of action to do it. There's nothing in here that says there's a limited number of times. You just, anytime you want to, you can use your passive instead of your roll. So you roll a nat 1, you're not going to have to deal with that. You can just use Beastly Demeanor and still have a decently high intimidation. So, yeah. At 3rd level, you choose your warrior archetype. I'll be doing a different video on each one of those, but I will talk about them here, or give you the names at least. The 3 archetypes, the 3 subclasses, are the Beast of Defiance, the Beast of Deliverance, and then the Marauder. I think the Beast aspect has something to do with the lore of the warrior. I don't know a ton of the lore of the warrior, but again, I did a little research for this, and I believe that's where the beast stuff comes from. And then the Marauder is the base job that you take at level 1 to eventually get upgrade to warrior at level 30. So that's where those come from. Again, we will go over all of those in their own videos. So. Moving forward, at 4th level, you get your ability score improvement. We've done that, talked about many times before. This goes to the same ABIs or ASIs, I'm sorry, as every other class other than fighters. So you get it at 4th, then 8th, 12th, 16th, and 19th. So yeah, easy there. 5th level, you get extra attack. Again, really simple stuff. Every weapons-based class, or almost every weapons-based class, gets extra attack. It's not surprising for this class. Moving forward to 7th level, you get raw intuition. When you are struck by a melee weapon attack, as a reaction, you may move directly back 5 feet from the creature and reduce the damage you have taken by 1d6. This damage reduction is increased to 2d6 at 13th level and 3d6 at 18th level. You can do this once. You must then finish a long rest to use raw intuition again. You can use this feature twice between long rests starting at 13 and 3 times at 18th level. So first things first, reducing damage taken by a die number is okay. The fact that it levels up a little bit is okay. That still means you can reduce the damage by 1 point, which even at level 1 is not useful. And this is a level 7 ability. By level 7, reducing something by 6 points, a single attack by 6 points, is almost worthless. 2d6 at 13th level, again, is not that great. That's not going to reduce a single attack. And that's if you roll high. If you roll low, you're just wasting your reaction at that point. And then 3d6 at 18th level. Again, by 18th level, there are attacks that can do 30, 40, 50 damage in a single hit. Even if you rolled max and took off 18, that's still less than half. It burns your reaction, so you can't use opportunity attacks or any other reaction-based abilities you might have. So yeah, the one kind of useful thing about this is being able to move back 5 feet can be extremely useful, because depending on what they are, like if they are an attack-based enemy and they use all their movement to get up to you, if on their first attack they hit you, and then you reduce the damage, which is next to nothing, and then move 5 feet back, they won't be able to use the rest of their attacks on you because you're now outside of their range and they have no movement left. So the one kind of really good thing about raw intuition is if you learn your enemy's patterns and how far they can move and kind of kite them around a little bit and be very aware of how far they can move, raw intuition could be extremely useful in being able to remove some of their attacks, which action economy wise is really good. The other thing raw intuition can be super useful for is simply just getting your fighter out of a bad situation. And the way you would do that is you don't use raw intuition until their final attack for the turn. Again, the damage reduction isn't going to be much, but using it on the last attack means they finish their attack, you've jumped 5 feet back, and then whenever your turn comes around, especially if your turn comes up next, you no longer have to worry about opportunity attacks because you've just moved out of their way, and you can move and go wherever you need to. So those are kind of the two useful things, but they're all based around being able to use your reaction to move back 5 feet. The damage reduction is almost pointless on this. And the limited use of it makes it even more pointless. Because not only do you have to use your reaction to do it, which I 100% agree with. Actually, economy-wise, you definitely want that. But you can only do it once until you hit 13th level. Again, by the time you're level 7, you're dealing with enemies that have multi-attack. Generally 2 or 3 attacks at that point. When you get up to 13th level, you're dealing with minimum of 3 attacks. Some of them have 4. And once you get to 18th level, there are some creatures that are going to be having 5 attacks per turn. And you get to use this on one of their attacks once per turn and effectively never get to use it again because you'll want to save it for the next fight. Because generally, again, according to the DMG, your average adventuring party should be getting into somewhere between like 4 to 6 fights per long day, or per adventuring day. So, yeah, it's such a limited ability. It has some interesting stuff in it. That 5-foot backwards motion is good, but it's hampered by only being able to use it once until 13th level, and then only being able to use it twice at 13th level, and by no one ever gets to 18th level. So yeah, it's just such a limiting thing that it almost doesn't do anything. So, yeah. The other thing you get at 7th level is Bellow of the Beast. You may expend 1 use of Berserk to intimidate a creature with advantage and doubling all of your bonuses to the Intimidate skill. So this one is a little bit closer to being broken. However, it's based around the idea that you actually use your Berserk in order to do it. So this actually is kind of interesting in the idea that your Berserks and the number of Berserks you can do in a day are now more than just, I activate this ability every time I go into combat. Now they are literally a limited resource that you can burn on other things. And I like that. I think it's interesting. Again, getting advantage is really nice. Doubling all your bonuses to the Intimidate skill, with the fact that you already have the passive intimidation score and stuff like that, I think that's a bit overkill. There's no real reason to do that. It effectively means anytime you use Bellow of the Beast, you're never going to fail. Which, with the fact that you already have advantage and you are kind of built around the idea that you should have a decent intimidate, you're probably going to be making most of your intimidation checks anyway. So you don't really need to double all your proficiency bonuses. I would say if they wanted to keep that aspect of it, maybe just doubling your proficiency bonus, which is really, really common in 5th edition, instead of all your bonuses. Because that could also, if you have a spell or something on you that's increasing your intimidation, that would also get doubled. So yeah, that would be the only thing I'd kind of change, is you don't really need double. If you really, really want double, you can use double your proficiency bonus, but I don't even think it needs that. Though with the fact that you're burning a Berserk to do it, yeah, I guess double at least your proficiency bonus, because that gives you a reason why you would want to burn your Berserk. Cool. At 9th level, you get Onslaught. When you use the dash action, you may make a melee weapon attack as a bonus action. You deal bonus damage on the attack equal to your Constitution modifier. Another reason to have a good Constitution. However, this sounds really familiar. And if you're wondering why that sounds familiar, because that is half of the Charger feat. The Charger feat is a feat that not enough players take. But the Charger feat is literally this. When you use your action to dash, you can use a bonus action to make one melee weapon attack or to shove a creature. So that's literally what that is. The difference being this, you can only make an attack, whereas Charger, you can shove as well. And Charger has extra benefits. If you move at least 10 feet in a straight line immediately before taking the bonus action, you either get a +5 bonus to the damage roll, or you can push the target 10 feet away from you instead of 5 feet with a normal shove. So this is just a watered down version of the Charger skill that they also allow you to add your Constitution modifier to your damage. But again, that's not going to be very high. Though, I mean, you're going to be improving your Constitution modifier for other things. So I guess it's kind of useful. But it requires you using the dash action, meaning instead of extra attack where you get to attack twice, now you get to make a single attack after using your dash action. And you have to use your bonus action to do it. So you are now trading 2 attacks plus your bonus action for Constitution modifier damage. It's not really worth it. There is literally only one situation where Onslaught would ever be useful, and that is there's an enemy that is too far away from you to make an attack. So you're going to be dashing anyway. This at least gives you something to do. That is the only time it's going to be useful. And a situation where that happens is remarkably rare in 5th edition D&D. It just doesn't happen a ton. It can, but normally if something is outside of your melee range, it generally means it's in a place that you can't get to, like a flying enemy or something like that. Battlefields themselves generally just aren't big enough in 5th edition for you to ever use Onslaught more than just as a gap closer at the beginning of combat. Which would be okay if it didn't take literally all of your actions to do that. So yeah, overall, I'm not a huge fan of Onslaught. Yeah, and again, this is another thing that in my class that I created, it's on the DM's Guild, the Dragon Knight. I do have a feature of one of the things that effectively gives the class the most of the benefits of the dual wielder feat. And the reason I do that is because the way the class is built, you can't use the dual wielder feat because you're using a single, what's called a double blade, which is a weapon I created specifically for the class. Because it is a single weapon, you cannot ever use the dual wield feat. So I put an aspect of that in there because despite the fact that you are using a double blade, that specific subclass that uses that was designed to be the dual wielding subclass. And so most people that dual wield take the dual wielder feat because it's incredibly useful. And because this was meant to emulate dual wielding, but doing it in a different way, I'm like, you know what? I'll give them the thing that's going to be most advantageous. So I'm actually not against giving aspects or basically taking inspiration from feats to give character classes abilities. If it's something that the class, because of how it's made or how it's designed to be played, they just never be able to benefit from taking that feat. But this class can. Other than the fact that the class already needs 2 really high scores and a 3rd decently high ability score, so they're not going to be able to take many feats because they just require too many ability scores to be high, which is poor design, not really anything else. So yeah, I'm not a fan of just taking the boring part, to be perfectly honest, of the Charger feat and giving it to them as a class ability, because it doesn't do anything in it, and it requires so much sacrifice to be made that it's literally Onslaught will always be what is the least worst option I can do. That is the only time you will choose Onslaught, is when it is the least bad choice you can make. So, yeah. At 11th level, you get Revenge. When a creature resolves a melee weapon attack against you, as a reaction, you may make one weapon attack against that creature. I'm not a huge fan of resolves attacks and things like that because in later editions, in later books, they do talk about resolving an attack a couple of times. But resolving an attack isn't something that was really used in 5th edition much at all. Like the wording itself just wasn't used a ton in 5th edition. And it harkens back to 3rd edition that had, and especially Pathfinder went crazy with the idea of resolving attacks and things like that. Because there were so many, the reason that you resolved attacks was between declaring the attack and making the roll, and then actually starting to do damage, there was like 6 or 7 steps in there. So resolving the attack was, okay, you have to do all these other things. You have to look at this modifier, this modifier, this modifier. You have to use this ability, this ability, this ability. It was a massively complicated thing. And so anytime I see the phrase resolve an attack, I immediately think of Pathfinder and 3rd edition because that's where that wording came from. And it worries me because the design of those games is extremely different from 5th edition. And if you go into creating 5th edition content with a 3rd edition mindset, you're just going to create bad content because you're basically making content for a different game. 3rd edition is different enough from 5th edition that they are completely separate games. I'm going to make a video, I might do it this week, where I actually talk about what I realize is the big difference between 3rd edition and 5th edition and those kind of like number crunchy style RPGs versus 5th edition, which is much more about playing in the moment and not so much number crunching. Is really numbers heavy systems like 3rd edition and 3.5 and Pathfinder put a huge emphasis on the choices you make at level up. That is where you're going to have the most impact on your character, is the choices you make at level up. Those choices will actually affect how you, the choices you make, or those choices will actually make choices for you in combat. So it is significantly more important to make good choices at level up than anywhere else in the game. If you make good choices at level up, the rest of the game will play itself effectively because everything else will be based off of how you built your character. In 5th edition, they put the emphasis on the choices you make in the moment. The choices you make at level up can be changed, and they're generally meant to give you options that you can take in the moment. But 5th edition class design and other systems like it are built around the idea that they don't give you right or wrong choices. They give you choices. If there's always a right choice, then there isn't a choice. And that's what 3rd edition is. And that's what this kind of resolves a melee weapon attack makes me think of is, okay, well, if you make the right choices at level up, then the rest of the game is just as simple. So yeah, sorry for going on that tirade. Like I said, I'm going to make a whole video on it just because I think it's a fascinating thing that I don't think anyone has really talked about. But anyway, so going to 13th level, you get Shake It Off. I'm just gonna shake it off. Yeah. Well, under the effects of Berserk, when you make a saving throw to resist a condition, excluding exhaustion, grappled, incapacitated, prone, restrained, stunned, and unconscious, you may choose to end your Berserk state to automatically succeed on the saving throw. You may do this after you roll, but before the outcome of the resist has been declared. I like that wording a lot better. That tends to line up a little bit more with how things are worded in 5th edition, where you can look at the die roll, but you have to do it before the DM tells you whether you pass or fail, is effectively what it says. Which is kind of an arbitrary thing anyway, because you know if you pass or fail before the DM tells you, generally. Unless it's the first time ever saving against that specific ability, you know. And if you roll like a 2, you definitely know. So overall, I like Shake It Off. Again, I like the idea that Berserk is your number of berserks you can do is being turned into its own limited resource. I like that. I think it's interesting. The list of exclusions are a bit much for me. Because that's a lot of things that you can't just shake off. But they kind of make sense. Yeah, I guess I don't know. I understand exhaustion because exhaustion's a big deal. Being able to remove a level of exhaustion takes at least a 5th level spell slot. So yeah, exhaustion makes sense. The grappled and restrained and stuff like that, I kind of get. And prone, I kind of get because that's more movement based than anything else. But stunned and incapacitated, I don't quite get. Because there are other abilities that give you the ability to get rid of those. And why you can shake off poison, but you can't shake off stunned, which generally poison lasts a lot longer. Or you can shake off a disease, but you can't shake off stunned. Especially since it's so incredibly rare you're ever going to get stunned by a creature. Stunning just isn't done a ton. It's a monk thing. So yeah, it's weird. There's nothing wrong with that. It just seems a little bit more limiting than I'd like it to be. But overall, again, it's a cool ability. It allows you to use your berserk charges for something other than berserking, which I like. In this particular instance, it requires you to already be berserking, but it gives you a way to use more berserk charges. So I like that. I think it's interesting. Because one of the things a lot of barbarians realize when you get to high levels is you never run out of rages. Every single fight, the first thing you do is you go into a rage. It's just how you play barbarian. So you generally never really have to worry. Once you get to about like 7 or 8, you never really have to worry about running out of rages because you're always going to have them. So yeah, overall I like it. I think it's cool. At 50th level, you get Upheaval. While you are under the effect of Berserk, you are able to unleash a powerful blow fueled by your vigor. You make an unarmed strike. If you hit, you may declare you are using Upheaval, which doesn't make a ton of sense, but whatever. We'll get back to that. The creature makes a Constitution saving throw. DC is 8 plus proficiency plus Constitution. So it's a Constitution-based con save. So that's interesting. On a failure, your unarmed strike deals a number of d12 of force damage, where the number of dice is equal to your Constitution modifier, with a minimum of 1d12 force damage and half as much damage on a success. Your Berserk state immediately ends after delivering the blow. So again, another way to kind of use up a Berserk to do a really, really powerful ability. I'm not a huge fan of the fact that, again, this is a really, really complicated ability for something really simple. You do damage. That's all it does, is you do damage. But it requires you to make an unarmed strike and hit. Then the creature makes a con save, and if they fail that, then you do the damage. There's like 3 steps for this very simple ability. And because it's not based on an unarmed strike, but is based on a saving throw, what that means is you can't crit on this, which would be really nice. Again, if you have a high Constitution modifier, doing 5d12 force damage is nice. The issue with this being, it doesn't say what kind of action you use to do this. It just says you make an unarmed strike. It says you make an unarmed strike. If you hit, you may declare you are using Upheaval. So partially it sounds like they're trying to make it so you can just make an unarmed strike, and if you miss, you don't waste your Upheaval. But if they make their save, you're going to waste the Upheaval anyways. And yeah, it's far too complicated for what it it needs to be. Again, it is simply, hey, you do a lot of damage and end your Berserk. That's cool. That's an interesting ability. Why it needs an unarmed strike and then a saving throw, and then it's a Constitution saving to the throw, and all this stuff with Constitution. It's weird, to be blunt. So yeah, it needs to be uncomplicated. We'll talk about that during final thoughts. At 17th level, you get Beastly Reflexes. While you are under the effects of Berserk, you are able to make 2 reactions per round. This is a really big deal. Again, action economy is a really, really important thing in 5th edition because there are extremely few abilities that allow you to gain actions in combat. That's why it's the major balancing factor in 5th edition. Whichever side has more actions has the advantage every single time. So by giving you additional reactions, that's super useful. It would almost be super useful if it could somehow interact with Raw Intuition. But at 17th level, you can only use Raw Intuition twice. So if you used it twice in one round, that means for the rest of the day, you can't use Raw Intuition because of how limited it is. Without that, Beastly Reflexes would actually be pretty interesting, and you could do some pretty interesting stuff with it. With the limitations to Raw Intuition, it's not nearly as useful. Again, because that's effectively your only reaction that's built into the class itself, you're really not going to be using it. Like, as much as opportunity attacks are very, very useful, they're just so rarely used in 5th edition. They just really aren't. You have to kind of set them up because most enemies are going to understand that if they walk away from you, they're going to get an opportunity attack. Even dumb ones, even ones with 3 intelligence can figure out, oh, if I run away, he'll hit me. So yeah, it'd be nice if you could make 2 opportunity attacks per round. You're not going to be able to do that though. The only thing you can really do that with is Raw Intuition, and it's so limited that you're never going to get a chance to use it. If you take a feat, which is going to be kind of hard, seeing as you have to use most of your ability score improvements to improve your strength and improve your constitution, and then improve your charisma. But if you take feats that give you reactions, that would actually make this useful. But other than that, like I said, it's a great ability that kind of falls on deaf ears because there's no way to really get a lot of benefit out of it without using a feat. And this is already such a heavy ability score, a heavy MAD class, multi-attribute dependent class, that you're really not going to be able to spend too much on feats. At 18th level, you get Holmgang. While you're under the effects of Berserk, as a bonus action, you are able to enter an indomitable state known as Holmgang for a number of rounds equal to half your Constitution modifier, rounded down, so 1 or 2. By 18th level, it's 2. Your hit points cannot fall below 1. Additionally, you may attempt to link yourself to a creature within 10 feet of you. If the creature is large-sized or smaller, the target creature must make a strength saving throw against your Berserk DC or be dragged to a space within 5 feet of you. The creature cannot leave the 5-foot radius around you, and your movement speed becomes 0 for the duration of Holmgang. You may only do this once. You must then finish a long rest to use Holmgang again. So this is really complicated. First things first, remember we talked about I don't even know if I remember mentioning, there is a Berserk DC built into Berserk. It's the same as the Rage DC if they have one. I actually don't think they have one in Rage. Anyway, it's 8 plus proficiency plus strength. Holmgang is the only ability that uses your Berserk DC in the base class. Everything else, like Upheaval, uses a strange Constitution one. Yeah, so it's strange that they go out and they mention that this Berserk DC exists, and then they come up with a completely different DC to use for Upheaval. If you're going to Upheaval requires you to be in Berserk, so why in the world wouldn't you use your Berserk DC instead of this Upheaval? Other than the fact that they wanted to make it Constitution based, which doesn't make a ton of sense. So yeah, this actually uses your Berserk DC, which is nice. But again, it's massively complicated for something that's not that useful. Literally, what you do here is you become invulnerable for a number of turns for 1 or 2 rounds, which is massive. That is a really, really big deal. Now, you become invulnerable in the idea that you can't die. However, you will still take full damage from anything until you hit 1 hit point. So Holmgang is from directly from Final Fantasy XIV. It's the holy shit button for warriors. I've talked about this before. All the tank classes have a holy shit button. Again, my personal favorite is Super Butt Clench, otherwise known as Super Bolide, which is the Gunbreaker holy shit button. And what it does is it makes you invulnerable to damage, but it reduces your hit points to 1 hit point, which most Gunbreakers have an upwards of 10,000 hit points. So going from 10,000 to 1 is a great way to make your healer have a heart attack. It's a super fun ability to use for that reason alone. So this is the holy shit button. I've mentioned before in the other tank things, giving every class their own version of the same ability goes against 5th edition class design. Every class is supposed to be unique. You're not supposed to have, oh, this is the monk's version of this. This is the rogue's version of this. This is the paladin's version of this. That's not supposed to be a thing in 5th edition. Does it happen? Extremely rarely. Hex is generally considered the Warlock's version of Hunter's Mark. But even then, it's different enough that it's close, but not quite. So other than that, you really generally don't get these kind of copycat abilities. And that's what Holmgang is kind of doing. However, it's massively complicated. You're invulnerable based on your Constitution modifier. And you also link a creature, but the creature has to be large or smaller. If it's bigger than large, then you can't do this. But if it's large or smaller, then they have to make a strength save against your Berserk DC. And then they get dragged to you, and they can move anywhere around you, but they can't move more than 5 feet away from you. And your speed becomes 0. Oh, this is just massively confusing. What it turns into practically is you become invulnerable from damage, and you grapple someone. Like, yeah, sure, this means that they can run around you. Yeah, they're not going to. If they can't move more than 5 feet from you, they're just going to wail on you. It's what it is. Especially if you're using reckless attack, they're just going to wail on you. So grappling them would have the exact same effect as this and doesn't require all this massive, well, it has to be this, and they have a strength save against this DC, and it's all confusing. No, make a grapple check. That already exists in the D&D. It's super, super simple and easy, and this just adds complexity for complexity's sake. Beyond that, it's a cool ability. It's a little bit overpowered. But it's a cool ability that's just marred by complexity that doesn't need to be there. We'll talk about it again during final thoughts, but it's a cool ability. It doesn't feel like it's just, oh, the holy shit button for this. It's different enough that it's going to feel different from playing a paladin or playing a gunbreaker or anything like that. So I like that. It just needs some toning down. Again, too often in class design in general, especially for people that are familiar with earlier versions of D&D, they decide, oh, well, if I do this and I do this, they add all this complexity, and all it does is it makes people not want to use the ability because there's so much that they have to do. It is a one and done ability. It's powerful enough that it deserves to be a one and done ability. Again, I'm not a huge fan of one and dones. This is a one and done. I'm totally fine for. And again, there's massive benefits you can have to not being able to die. Again, using reckless attack is a great thing to do when you have Holmgang on, because you want people to attack you. You want to be the most beautiful target ever. Hit yourself with fairy fire before you Holmgang. Take off all your armor and moon the enemy when you Holmgang. Let them use all their attacks against you. You know, insult their mothers. Like, literally, you want everyone attacking you. The other thing that's really nice about Holmgang, especially since you get to kind of drag someone, you can use this to set up Fireball for a formation. Fireball formation, if you're not familiar, Fireball is an area attack. You hit everything in a 20-foot radius sphere. what we call fireball formation is whenever you have enemies that are just kind of gathered in one place, we call it fireball formation. So it's super easy to hit them. And it generally is pretty easy to make sure you're not going to hit your allies with that, because if they're all in a little area, you can move your sphere so that it only hits the enemy. Getting the enemies into fireball formation by just making them attack you or dragging one in and then moving the rest in, that's a great idea. And then with Holmgang, because you can't go below 1 hit point, just have everyone nuke that spot. Every super powerful spell, area, ability, whatever. Get your, Radiant Soul Monk to just start throwing suns at there and things like that. Like, just completely obliterate the place. At the end, when everyone is reduced to a pile of ash, except the warrior, just stand there going, dude, that was totally awesome, man. Use Holmgang right, and you can do some amazing stuff. Like I said, it needs some tweaking to make it work a little better, but overall, I think it's a cool ability. Finally, at 20th level, you get Infuriate. If you have no uses of Berserk left, when you roll initiative, you recover 2 uses of Berserk instantly. Again, there are so many different versions of that ability in 5th edition. It's unbelievably common. Funny enough, it's not something that barbarians get. And normally, I would say, because you only get a maximum of 6, I would say giving 2 uses of it back would be a bad idea. But again, your Berserk is not just your ability, your number of Berserk, or uses of Berserks, is not just a thing that lets you go into your Berserk state, which will last the entire combat. You never need more than 1 Berserk in a combat, because again, it lasts for a minute, which is to 10 rounds. Combat doesn't last more than to 10 rounds in 5th edition. If it lasts more than 10 rounds, you've done something very, very wrong. So you never need more than 1 Rage for a barbarian in combat. However, because you can use it for other things, it makes perfect sense to have 2 uses instead of 1. So that means you can shake it off, or you can Upheaval and not screw yourself out of being able to Berserk the next turn. So I like it. I think it's cool. So final thoughts / revisions. Overall, this is a weaker version of the Barbarian, to be blunt. It's got the majority of Barbarian's defining features, which is Rage and Reckless Attack are the 2 big defining features of the Barbarian. The only other defining feature is Danger Sense. Which would make more sense to have that in here too, but they had all these other things. So overall, I'm not a huge fan. How would I change it? Well, I'm glad you asked, person that doesn't exist. I've actually started writing down my changes to make it easier for me to kind of publish them. Not here, but on the Final Fantasy XIV Reddit, so that Soren, if he wants to use any of these, will have an easier time just finding the changes themselves. If you want to know why I make the changes, you can go here, but I'm planning on just publishing the changes going forward on the Reddit specifically for Soren, but for other people that have requested it as well. Someone requested it in the Reddit, and I mentioned to them, writing things down is really difficult for me just because of my anxiety and everything. I don't know why, but writing things down really sets off my anxiety for some bizarre reason. So I cannot guarantee I will be able to do this for every single class and subclass. But for the ones I can, I will, and the ones I can't, I won't. We'll see how it goes. So, the changes that I would recommend to make the warrior work a little bit better. For level 1, fighting style doesn't need any changes. But for Berserk, I want to change it. Again, Berserk, how it is just a really wimpy version of Rage. And we don't need that. We need something different. We want again, 5th edition class design. Every class should play very, very differently right from the beginning. So, Berserk in Final Fantasy XIV increases your crit chance. That's all it does. So I didn't quite understand why they used Berserk, other than the fact that they're copying Rage, and Berserk sounds like Rage. So, I'm even going to change the name of the ability because there's another ability they have. It is their tanking stance. It's called Defiance. And that's what I want to change the name of the ability. And this is how Defiance is going to work. Beginning at first level, you can use a bonus action to enter into a state of Defiance. Well, in this state of Defiance, when you hit an enemy with a melee weapon at attack, you can mark the enemy. A marked enemy has disadvantage on any attacks that don't include you as a target, and any enemy subject to a saving throw from a marked target has advantage against that saving throw if you are not also subject to that saving throw ability. An enemy remains marked until the start of your next turn. Your Defiance lasts for 1 minute. It ends early if you're knocked unconscious. You can also end your Defiance on your turn as a bonus action. You may enter a state of Defiance a number of times shown in the Defiance column on the warrior table. You regain all uses of Defiance after a long rest. So, Berserk turns into Defiance. For most abilities in this, all you have to do is replace Berserk with Defiance. But how Defiance work is massively different. And this is another thing that I'm taking directly from 4th edition. I've mentioned before, I loved 4th edition. I think it was a vastly undervalued edition. And one of the things in 4th edition they had for the defender role there, any classes that were defenders, they would have this ability to mark. Mark, literally what happened was when you would mark a target, and each class had a different way of marking. Some of them would just mark a target. Some of them would mark when they attacked it. Some of them had a special ability that allowed them to mark. The mark at its base form, what it did was it gave them -2 to their attack roll against if they made an attack against anyone other than the target that marked them. So it made them a target for attacks, and it gave the enemies a reason to focus on the defenders. That's what this is doing. The mechanic for marking already kind of exists in 5th edition with things like Compelled Duel, and there's a couple other abilities in 5th edition that basically do the same thing as marking, but they call it something different. I didn't want to get confusing with this, so we're just going to call it marking because it's easy, it's simple. And it does exactly what we want to. It's going to allow it's actually going to emulate the abilities of Defiance much better than Berserk did of how it works in Final Fantasy XIV. Your tanking stance, what it does is increases the enmity you generate. Enmity is a number that you can't see anywhere, but enemies keep track of it. And whoever has the highest enemy, there are bars you can see next to the enemies that show how much enmity you have against different enemies. But anyway, whichever creature has the highest enmity, for the most part, that's who the creatures are attack. So anytime you're tanking in Final Fantasy XIV, you turn on your tank stance. And for the most part, as long as you hit the enemy and you're using your abilities, you don't even have to use them well. You just have to make sure you're hitting the enemy somehow. You will very rarely drop enmity to where the enemy goes and attacks someone else because they're doing a ton of damage. That's what it's designed to do. The tanking stance makes enemies attack you, and that's what Defiance is going to do in 5th edition, is it allows you to mark. Now, something that people learned in 4th edition is mark actually has a couple different ways you could do it. And depending on the class you were playing and how you marked, you would treat your marks differently. Some classes gained a huge benefit from just having enemies attack them. So they would mark creatures with the intent of having the creature attack them. That is one way. This will incentivize enemies to attack you, meaning they won't attack your friends. And because you have a higher armor class, because you're wearing heavy armor, you can use a shield, they are going to hit you a lot less often than your friends. Because you have a D12 to the damage die, even when they hit you, you have more hit points than your allies are going to have. So you may play Defiance off as a way to just make enemies hit you. That's the most basic way to do it. The other way you could use marking, and this is the way I did it when I played a sword mage, was you would mark an enemy intentionally that couldn't come to it to attack you. So you would attack the guy next to you, and as long as you were next to you, there wasn't a real good reason why they wouldn't attack you. So you didn't really need to mark them. You would mark someone far away. And what would happen with the sword mage, I played an assault sword mage. What would happen is when a marked target of mine attacked a creature and hit that wasn't me, I could immediately interrupt the attack, go over, teleport to them, and make a melee basic attack against them. So to play a sword mage well, what you wanted to do was not mark the target you were attacking. You wanted to mark a target that was as far away from you as physically possible and do everything you could to make sure they couldn't attack you, so that they would go and they would try to attack someone else, possibly miss, but even if they hit, you would get to teleport over to them and damage them. And different flavors of sword mage, there was a bunch of different ways you could do it, had different ways to do it, but you would get, your ability would proc whenever a marked enemy would actually hit someone other than you. So that's the other way you can go about using Berserk, is you can use it on the enemy that you're attacking, or you can mark a target, which again requires a melee weapon at attack. Mark a target and then find a way to get away from them, or find a way to make it so they can't attack you for whatever reason. Maybe you have a dancer and you're using dance partner. Remember we talked about that in sync thing, where you could literally attack, or you could attack from their location, mark the person over there, and then they would try to attack the bard, but they'd have disadvantage now. Or attack someone here, run away, provoke the opportunity attack so nobody else is getting it. That's another thing that tank style characters in D&D will do a lot of. And then run away to get to someone else, so that either they're going to follow you, or and this is especially useful if you want to try and provoke opportunity attacks, go into a fight with an ally right next to you, mark them, run away, provoke their opportunity attack so they can't use it on anyone else. When the enemy's turn comes up, your ally's right there, so if they run to go get you, they're going to get an opportunity attack. If they decide to attack your ally, they're going to do it with disadvantage. Either way, you are benefiting your party. So there's two different ways you can use this Defiance, and depending on how you build the class out, or your specific version of the warrior out, you're probably going to specialize in one or the other, or maybe in both simultaneously. I don't know. But remember, Defiance is not only beneficial if they attack you. It is just as beneficial if you can mark someone that can't attack you. So remember that. Getting to level 2, just remove Reckless Attack. You don't need it. They have enough cool stuff in this that they don't need Reckless Attack. And again, it's a barbarian defining feature. We don't need to give it to other classes. It waters down the barbarian. For Beastly Demeanor, no change. It's already a cool enough ability. I think it's great. And for a second level ability, I think it's really, really interesting and fun. And with the changes we made, turning Berserk into Defiance, there's enough there that you're still going to be able to have some fun and do some interesting things at level 2, whether it has it or not. For levels 3, 4, and 5, no changes. Leave them exactly the way they are. You choose your archetype at 3rd level, get your ability score improvement at 4th, and for extra, you get extra attack at 5th level. For level 7, for raw intuition, remove the limited uses. It's not a powerful enough ability for it to need to have limited uses. It's already limited by the fact that you have to use your reaction to do that. Still requires the reaction to perform, must be in Defiance to activate, and then instead of reducing the damage by a d6, which again I said is basically pointless by level 7, and it remains pointless even after it upgrades, you gain resistance to the damage of that specific attack. And then change struck by a melee weapon attack to just take damage. So anytime you take damage, you can use your reaction to hop 5 feet back, which is still a thing. It uses your reaction, and you get resistance to that attack only. Because it's not resistance for the rest of your turn or anything, it's not going to be massively broken. With Defiance, you're going to be targeted a little bit more. So raw intuition is going to make it so you can take a few more of those attacks than you would. It also means you're going to gain a benefit for spell casting and things like that. That's the other thing with Defiance, because it affects saving throws imposed by someone that's marked. It actually can be useful against targets that cast spells. It's not exclusively useful for targets that make attack rolls. And so yeah, raw intuition works against spells, works against other things. It's still limited by your reaction. and that 5 feet of movement is still useful. So yeah, like I said, I thought Raw Intuition was really interesting. It needed some tweaking. And then Bellow the Beast doesn't need any changes. It's already cool. Like I mentioned before, I thought about if I were to make a change, you don't need to double all your bonuses, just double your proficiency bonus. So yeah, that would be the only kind of change I would say. So only double proficiency bonus. I can't type. All right, so that's the only change to that. Level 9, we're going to get rid of Onslaught. Again, Onslaught in Final Fantasy XIV is a gap closer. It's really only used at the beginning of combat for the warrior to just jump in. Every tank class has a gap closer. A lot of classes have gap closers. I think the Sage actually gets a gap closer, who's a healer. No one's quite sure why the Sage gets a gap closer, but they get it. So gap closer's not that big a deal, and in 5th edition, it's not that big a deal either. Extra movement's nice, but Onslaught just doesn't work. So we're going to change Onslaught. We're going to replace it with Tomahawk. Tomahawk is actually a really cool warrior ability from Final Fantasy XIV. Again, in Final Fantasy XIV, warriors use massive two-handed pole axes effectively. They call them battle axes, but if you look, especially at lower level ones, they are much closer to what's called a pole axe, which looks like a regular axe, but actually has like a full like spear length, like 5 or 6 foot long pole on it. So you can actually attack from further away, but because the pole is so long, it amplifies the amount of force just through the properties of a lever. So you can attack and just get more force. You can attack further away. And by using the properties of the level, you can get more force in a smaller area just by reacting that way. So they effectively use pole axes or giant battle axes. And what Tomahawk is it's their ranged attack. It's an off global cooldown ability, and they literally just take this massive like axe the size of their body and they double-handed hurl it at the enemy. It's super cool. It's super fun. That's what we're replacing Onslaught with, but we're going to make it work a little bit differently so that it works cool in 5th edition. So, Tomahawk, beginning at 9th level, when you take the attack action while in Defiance, you may replace one of your attacks with a Tomahawk attack. Make a melee weapon attack against a creature within a distance equal to half your current movement speed, as if the target were within your melee range. If that attack hits, you throw your current weapon at the target, dealing damage as you would normally if you hit with a melee weapon attack, then moving to the... I totally typed this wrong. Then move to the closest space within 5 feet of the target to retrieve your weapon. This movement does not provoke opportunity attacks. You can use Tomahawk a number of times equal to your proficiency bonus. You regain all uses when you finish a long rest. So... Tomahawk, you get to hurl your weapon. Now, I chose the wording here really specifically. You make a melee weapon attack, meaning you can mark the target. It replaces one of your attacks when you use the attack action. So extra attack, one of them can now be a Tomahawk. And you move when you do it. The way that I've worded it specifically is the movement is automatic. This is not something you can choose to move or not. You have to. But it means you can mark multiple targets. Remember how I talked about Defiance? There's 2 different ways you can go about it. One of them is marking a target to make them hit you. The other one is marking a target specifically so that they can't hit you, to make it harder for them to hit other characters. That's one of the things that Tomahawk will help. The reason I didn't make it a specific number is... if you take a feat, the mobile feat would work really, really well with Defiance specifically because it means you don't provoke opportunity attacks anytime you make an attack against an enemy. Any enemy that you make an attack against with a mobile feat, you don't provoke opportunity attacks, whether you hit or miss. And mobile also increases your speed by 10 feet. It also means if you get a spell cast on you like Haste, where it increases your speed or something like that, all of those things will work together with Defiance and Tomahawk to really give you some choices as far as how you want to use your marking mechanic. Now, once you get extra attack, hitting the same enemy twice is never going to be as useful for your character specifically as is hitting two different enemies with your attack. And effectively, 4 levels after you get extra attack at level 9, you get this ability to hit at range. At base speed, you're going to be able to attack an enemy up to 15 feet away. If you take the mobility feat, that adds another 5 feet to it because it's half. If you get something cast on you that increases your speed, however, it's going to increase how far you can to the tomahawk. All those things are useful. All of those things are going to benefit how you play the class and really help you kind of decide how you want to do this. Again, if you want to use Tomahawk to just make it so that more people are attacking you, then position yourself after the Tomahawk so that the other person you've marked can come and attack you. If you want to use it the other way, where it's just like giving the other character disadvantage basically on any attack rolls they make, then you attack them first and then Tomahawk away and then get as far away from them as possible. Again, this doesn't use your movement or anything. So in addition to to just using your Tomahawk to move, you still have your move action to be able to get further away. So it really opens up the possibilities of how you want to play this class. And it's still going to be filling that role of protecting your allies that the warrior does in Final Fantasy XIV. So, yeah. Going to 11th level, we're going to be changing Revenge. Basically, we're going to change the text from what it currently is to beginning at 11th level. When a creature hits you with an attack, you may use your reaction to make a melee weapon attack against them if they're in your attack range. You may replace this melee weapon attack with your Tomahawk ability if they're in range of that ability. So, Revenge required a melee weapon attack. What we're going to change it to is just if you're hit with an attack, which in 5th edition effectively means if they hit you with something that requires an attack roll. We're not specifically going to if you're damaged, just because that makes us a little bit too useful. But if you are hit with an attack, you can attack them back using your reaction. Again, because you get to make a melee weapon attack, you can mark them using that attack, meaning if they get multiple attacks, you're going to be able to kind of modify how that works. And if they're far away, you can Tomahawk them, meaning you can go up to them, which may mean, especially if you're dealing with a creature that has multi-attack on ranged attacks, being able to Tomahawk them and immediately move up to them means any further attacks they make against you, ranged attacks, are going to be made at disadvantage. So, yeah. It means you do have to make the choice between Raw Intuition and Revenge, which again is going to influence whether or not you want to use it. Raw Intuition is going to make you a lot harder to kill. So if you are going to be getting hit by a lot of attacks, you may want to save your Raw Intuition, your reaction for your Raw Intuition. However, if someone's making ranged attacks against you and you want to move around, or again, if you're surrounded by enemies that you've already marked, you can use Revenge to Tomahawk away to a point where they may not be able to get you, especially since it's just they have to be within range. It doesn't say they have to be within lateral range. So theoretically, if they're on a floor above you or something and they're shooting out a window or something, you can just move up to them and be on this higher floor, meaning all these guys can't. You don't provoke opportunity attacks because that's not how Tomahawk works. Again, it gives you a lot of choices. It doesn't give you a definite right or wrong to the choice. So, for 13th level, for Shake It Off, Basically, just change where they say Berserk to Defiance. It's just changing some words to make it work with Defiance instead of Berserk. It's not a big deal. For 15th level, for Upheaval, we changed the text completely. Because again, Upheaval was a cool ability, but it was just far too complicated. So we're changing it to beginning at 15th level. While you are in Defiance, you can unleash a powerful blow fueled by your vigor. As an action, make an unarmed strike against a target within range. On a hit, they take a number of d12 equal to your Constitution modifier, minimum of 1d12, of force damage. This action ends your Defiance. So, change it around to make it an action instead of a bonus action because it's a powerful ability. Changed the save mechanics so that this can actually crit, meaning in situations where you have advantage on your attack rolls against a creature, this can be very, very useful. You still get the regular damage from an unarmed strike, which is going to be normally 1 plus your strength modifier. If you if you take a feat to get the fighting style unarmed fighting, you actually have a dice number for it. Or if you take the brawler feat, you actually do a d4 plus your strength mod. But anyway, no matter what it is, you make your unarmed strikes. You're going to do that damage already, and then they're going to take additional damage based on your Constitution modifier. I still like the idea of using your Constitution modifier for it, just to give you something else to use instead of just a strength. And yeah, that means you can do up to 5d12 force damage, which is going to be more damage than you can do with your extra attacks. Even if you're dual wielding, this is going to be more damage than you can do. It's one of the reasons I made it an action instead of a bonus action. And it ends your Defiance. So it still has that idea of being able to burn your Defiance for whatever reason. And do a lot of the damage. Again, it's going to have limited situations where it's useful, but by the time you're 15th level, you have 5 uses of Defiance. So choosing when you want to use this is not going to be a horrible thing. It's just there are going to be certain situations which are going to be very, very useful, and then there's going to be certain situations which it's better for you to stay in Defiance. But yeah, so there's that. 17th level, change Beastly Reflexes. Again, just changed Berserk to Defiance effectively. For 18th level, for Holmgang, we're changing the ability just because, again, it's a really cool ability, but it's just far too complicated. So this is what the new text will be. Beginning at 18th level, while in Defiance, you can use an action to use Holmgang. Your speed becomes 0, and your hit points cannot be reduced below 1 HP until the end of your next turn. So we're not dealing with half your Constitution modifier rounded down or anything. It's just to the end of your next turn. So this turn, and then next turn as well, you don't have to worry about that until the end of your next turn. In addition, choose a creature within 10 feet of you and have them make a strength saving throw. Really simple. Strength save. Your DC is 8 plus proficiency plus your strength mod. So super simple. They just make a strength save. You don't have to roll anything else. On a failure, the creature is pulled next to you and is grappled and restrained by you until the end of your next turn. So we're using terms that already exist, grappled and restrained. Restrained is really good because it means all attacks against them have advantage and all theirs attacks have disadvantage. So action economy wise, that's really useful. You're getting them there. I took out the limitation of it has to be a larger, smaller creature. I don't really know why they had that other than if they were trying to make it realistic or something. And I think Holmgang, it's an 18th level ability. You're nearly demigods at this point. I have no problem with you grappling a dragon. An ancient red dragon. I think it's cool. So yeah. And then you may use Holmgang once. You must finish a long rest, use Holmgang again. So again, took out a lot of the complexity of it and a lot of the other things that you had to kind of try and figure out. No. Bare minimum, your hit point can't be reduced below 1 hit point and your speed becomes 0. So you're not going to be moving while this is happening. But And it also means Tomahawk you can't use because your speed becomes 0 and Tomahawk is based on half of your speed. But you still have... You're still invincible. So anything within melee range, you're going to be doing fine. If you have a reach weapon, you're going to be perfectly fine. And then you get to choose a creature that you effectively get to grapple and restrain, and the only thing they get to do is make a strength save over it. And strength is going to be your highest ability score. Constitution is going to be relatively high. Strength is going to be it. And then the next turn, if you wanted to use Upheaval, because all this stuff still happens until the end of your next turn. So if you wanted to use Upheaval while you had that happening, you could. There's a lot of different things, but again, the original aspect of Holmgang was just a little bit too powerful. This, and a little bit too complicated. This makes it a little less complicated and still gives you a lot of use for it, to the point where it's still a worthwhile one and done ability. And then for level 20 for Infuriate, just again, change Berserk to Defiance so that it works. So that is my suggestion on how to make this class work a little bit better. Like I said, changing Berserk to Defiance massively changes how the rest of the class works. And then most of the other changes I made are just really making things work with Defiance. And it makes this class play extremely uniquely. The Defiance mechanic doesn't currently exist in 5th edition. There are similar things that provide similar benefits, but they're all very, very limited. Defiance is effectively unlimited for as long as you have enough charges to be able to go into Defiance. I think it fits better with how the Warriors played in Final Fantasy XIV, and I think it would be super, super fun to play on the table. And again, it's going to play like no other class in the game right now. And that's what you want. If you're creating a brand new class for 5th edition, it should play differently. That's the entire point of a new class. If it's just going to be, oh, well, it's going to play just like this other class, but you can do this, then make a subclass. That's why since 5th edition has been out, they have added one new class, and that is the Artificer. That's it. They haven't done any other new classes because they don't need to. They can. The classes are varied enough that simply adding a subclass is enough to massively change how you play the class. So yeah, overall, that is going to be all for me today. As always, like, subscribe, turn notifications on in the comments below. What do you guys think about the Defiance mechanic? Like I said, I think it fits better with how translating Final Fantasy XIV to D&D 5th edition, and I think it would be super fun to play. But I'm interested in hearing from you guys. Let me know in the comments down below. Otherwise, again, that's all from me today, and I'll see you guys in the next time. All right? Bye-bye.